Only the truly religious dare to question their faith.
Let's see. We talked about this one already a little bit. Believing something that is false feels just like believing something that is true.
Well, believing something feels like believing something, whether it's true or false is, again, that gets back to this objective reality stuff.
Yeah.
But if you believe something, then that has its own set of emotions and, has consequences for believing something.
Hmm.
Again, belief assumes that there is something out there that you're
Hmm.
believing in, and that it is structured a certain way, and that you know how it's structured, or you believe you know how it's
Hmm.
structured. And yeah.
What if I replaced believing with being convinced? Like being convinced that something is false feels just like being convinced that something is true. Like the feeling is the same.
Yeah. Okay. I have to think about that for a second. Well, this is about a yeah. I don't know. Nothing's coming up. I don't know. I don't know how to respond to. That's like believing that something, or assume. Let's just say I'm assuming that something is true, or assuming that something is false. In both cases, it's simply my assumption from my own experience and history and stuff, and I assume this or that. I guess they're pretty much the same. I
You
don't know.
said you said earlier that you there have been times where you found out that you were not correct, right?
Yeah.
And so the feeling before you found out that you were not correct, the feeling that you had was the same feeling, right? Like uh, the feeling of having an accurate assumption is the same feeling of having an inaccurate assumption, but being convinced that it was accurate.
Um, well, I'm thinking of a particular instance in my life when I made a bet with somebody, and luckily they didn't hold me to it because I bet them a whole bunch of money that I didn't have. And it was this idea as if there was a rope around the equator, all
Hmm.
the way around the Earth. So 25,000 miles of, say, wire, maybe even. And if you added a foot of wire to that 25,000 miles, that it would lift the rope 3 inches off the surface. And I thought, no, that's crazy. That's not right. Yeah, just 1 foot to 25,000 miles, and it's going to lift the rope 3 inches off the surface. And I was absolutely convinced that that was not right. But
Hmm.
later I did the math, and and I was convinced that, well, no, it would lift it 3 inches. It just seemed so wrong to me that I was so convinced that that was not right. And yet,
Like that's how the math works out.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Hmm.
I'm convinced by the math that, in fact, if there was a rope around a an 8,000-mile diameter perfect sphere, and you added a foot to that rope, that it would elevate it 3 inches or something like that off the surface.
Hmm. Like the apex of the curve would be 3 inches high.
Well, no, I mean it would be separate. I mean, if you got to imagine an 8,000 mile perfect sphere with a wire around the equator
Hmm.
that's 25,000 miles long, and you add a foot to that wire, that
Yeah.
that and that wire would then expand out and be 3 inches off the surface as opposed to on the surface,
Oh, where it's lifted all the way around,
all the
not
way
in just
around.
one spot. Oh,
No, no,
okay.
all the way around.
I understand now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that sound that like I say, I was so counterintuitive to me at the time. I was probably 16 or 17 or something at the time, and I just rejected it flatly,
Hmm.
and was going to bet this guy, I don't know, $1,000 or some shit. And then
It
he,
wasn't your landlord, was it? The one that
no, no,
the one that cashed all the checks at once.
no, no, no. Yeah, but that came as a shock to me because I was so convinced, and once I did the math, I realized, well, shit, I was wrong, and that was
Hmm.
quite humbling.
And the feeling that you had when you thought you were right is the same feeling that you had when w if you had been right, I guess
Well,
is what I'm
well,
asking.
no, no, well, there was a humiliation involved in realizing I was so wrong.
Before you found out that you were wrong, though.
Well, I was
The
at
feeling of being wrong, or the feeling of being right, and the feeling of being wrong but thinking you're right is the same feeling,
um,
is
well,
what
that's a
this
little bit.
says.
Yeah, I got what you're saying, but I can't
Okay.
really divorce myself from it because afterwards, I mean, like I say, I mean, I couldn't help but remember that I was wrong. So the fact
Hmm.
that I now think I'm right, yeah, it's good. I'm convinced that in fact it would elevate that thing all the way around up to 3 inches off. But yeah, I, I don't know. Because since it's the same circumstance, I can't divorce myself from the feeling that I was right before and now realizing that I was wrong and now feeling like I'm right. That's a very different. So it would. I think I'd have to find a better analogy for this, and I can't think of one right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So what's the question again?
Believing something that is false feels just like believing something that is true. And I'm substituting believing with being
So,
convinced of.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I would say if you believe something, then you believe something, and whether you're right or wrong is sort of irrelevant.
Belie uh, being mm, being right or wrong is irrelevant.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're just talking about a belief that I hold, if I believe something, there's no way for me to test it or anything, or, you know, then, whatever I believe, that's what I believe. And whether it's true or false is kind of irrelevant.
Okay. Hmm.
I mean, because as long as I believe it, then it's true, you know,
Yeah,
unless
yeah,
something
you're
comes up.
convinced that it's true. That's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
yeah,
So if I'm convinced, then I'm convinced. If something comes along and shows me that I'm wrong, then I'll have to reevaluate. But
yeah.
in the absence of that, a belief is a belief.
Hmm. Yeah. The way I see it is when I'm convinced that I'm right, that feeling that I'm right is the same feeling I have when I'm convinced that I'm right and I'm not.
Well, but those are two very different situations. I mean, to to talk to posit that you believe something but you're not right. I mean, that's very different than believing something and not having come to the conclusion that you're wrong.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think you can even compare those two situations. I mean,
Well, I'm
once you
talking
find
about the
out you're wrong,
feeling.
Once you find out you're wrong, you no longer believe it.
Right. Well, yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're not convinced. But I'm talking about the feeling that I have, the feeling that I have when I'm right and I'm convinced I'm right is the same feeling that I have when I'm convinced I'm right, but I'm not.
Yeah, I
And
would
I
agree.
don't know it.
Yeah, yeah. Convinced is the
Yeah.
operative word here. Whether what's
Yeah.
really going on is irrelevant.
Yeah.